Cyflix presents a classic horror audiobook. You're listening to The Moon Pool by Abraham Merritt. Welcome to this audiobook of The Moon Pool, a haunting classic by Abraham Merritt. First published in 1918 as a short story in All Story Weekly, The Moon Pool captivated readers with its blend of horror, adventure, and supernatural mystery. Abraham Merritt, celebrated for his vivid storytelling and masterful use of atmosphere, takes us to the enigmatic South Seas. Here, Dr. David Throckmorton and his expedition team encounter an ancient ruin with a strange, luminous pool, a place whispered to hold secrets from lost ages. On moonlit nights, an unearthly force emerges from the depths, taking those who dare to venture near. As Throckmorton and his colleagues confront the mystery of this moonlit pool, they encounter forces beyond their understanding, powers neither alive nor dead, guarding a secret that transcends time. What is the nature of the ancient entity that claims those who approach, and can they survive its eerie grasp? Prepare yourself for an atmospheric journey into the unknown with The Moon Pool.
I am breaking a long silence to clear the name of Dr. David Throckmorton and to lift the shadow of scandal from that of his wife and of Dr. Charles Stanton, his assistant. That I have not found the courage to do so before, all men who are jealous of their scientific reputations will understand when they have read the facts entrusted to me alone. I shall first recapitulate what has actually been known of the Throckmorton expedition to the island of Ponape in the Carolines, the Throckmorton Mystery, as it is called. Dr. Throckmorton set forth, you will recall, to make some observations of Nan Matal, that extraordinary group of island ruins, remains of a high and prehistoric civilization that are clustered along the east shore of Ponape. With him went his wife, to whom he had been wedded less than half a year. The daughter of Professor Fraser Smith, she was as deeply interested and almost as well informed as he upon these relics of a vanished race that titanically strew certain islands of the Pacific and form the basis for the theory of a submerged Pacific continent. Mrs. Throckmorton, it will be recalled, was much younger, 15 years at least, than her husband. Dr. Charles Stanton, who accompanied them as Dr. Throckmorton's assistant, was about her age. These three and a Swedish woman, Thora Helveson, who had been Edith Throckmorton's nurse in babyhood and who was entirely devoted to her, made up the expedition. Dr. Throckmorton planned to spend a year among the ruins, not only of Ponape, but of Lele, the twin centers of that colossal riddle of humanity whose answer has its roots in immeasurable antiquity. A weird flower of man-made civilization that blossomed ages before the seeds of Egypt were sown, of whose arts we know little, and of whose science and secret knowledge of nature nothing. He carried with him complete equipment for his work and gathered at Ponape a dozen or so natives for laborers. They went straight to Metalanim harbor and set up their camp on the island called Ushen Tau, in the group known as the Nan Matal. You will remember that these islands are entirely uninhabited and are shunned by the people on the main island. 3 months later, Dr. Throckmorton appeared at Port Moresby, Papua. He came on a schooner manned by Solomon Islanders and commanded by a Chinese half-breed captain. He reported that he was on his way to Melbourne for additional scientific equipment and whites to help him in his excavations, saying that the superstition of the natives made their aid negligible. He went immediately on board the steamer Southern Queen, which was sailing that same morning. 3 nights later, he disappeared from the Southern Queen, and it was officially reported that he had met death either by being swept overboard or by casting himself into the sea. A relief boat sent with the news to Ponape found the Throckmorton camp on the island Ushantau and a smaller camp on the island called Nantanach. All the equipment, clothing, supplies were intact. But of Mrs. Throckmorton, of Dr. Stanton, or of Thora Helverson, they could find not a single trace. The natives who had been employed by the archaeologist were questioned. They said that the ruins were the abode of great spirits, Ani, who were particularly powerful when the moon was at the full. On these nights, all the islanders were doubly careful to give the ruins wide berth. Upon being employed, they had demanded leave from the day before full moon until it was on the wane, and this had been granted them by Dr. Throckmorton. Thrice they had left the expedition alone on these nights. On their third return, they had found the 4 white people gone, and they knew that the Ani had eaten them. They were afraid and had fled. That was all. The Chinese half-caste was found and reluctantly testified at last that he had picked Dr. Throckmorton up from a small boat about 50 miles off Ponape. The scientist had seemed half mad, but he had given the seaman a large sum of money to bring him to Port Moresby and to say, if questioned, that he had boarded the boat at Ponape Harbour. That is all that has been known to anyone of the fate of the Throckmorton expedition. Why, you will ask, do I break silence now, and how came I in possession of the facts I am about to set forth? To the first I answer, I was at the Geographical Club recently, and I overheard 2 members talking. They mentioned the name of Throckmorton, and I became an eavesdropper. One said, "Of course, what probably happened was that Throckmorton killed them all. It's a dangerous thing for a man to marry a woman so much younger than himself and then throw her into the necessarily close company of exploration with a man as young and as agreeable as Stanton was. The inevitable happened, no doubt. Throckmorton discovered, avenged himself. Then followed remorse and suicide." "Throckmorton didn't seem to be that kind," said the other thoughtfully. "No, he didn't," agreed the first. "Isn't there another story?" went on the second speaker. "Something about Mrs. Throckmorton running away with Stanton and taking the woman, Thora, with her? Somebody told me they had been recognized in Singapore recently." "You can take your pick of the 2 stories," replied the other man. "It's one or the other, I suppose." "It was neither one nor the other of them. I know, and I will answer now the second question, because I was with Throckmorton when he vanished. I know what he told me, and I know what my own eyes saw. Incredible, abnormal, against all the known facts of our science as it was, I testify to it. And it is my intention, after this is published, to sail to Ponape, to go to the Nanmatal, and to the islet beneath whose frowning walls dwells the mystery that Throckmorton sought and found, and that at the last sought and found Throckmorton. I will leave behind me a copy of the map of the islands that he gave me, also his sketch of the great courtyard of Nantanach, the location of the moon door, his indication of the probable location of the moon pool and the passage to it, and his approximation of the position of the shining globes. If I do not return, and there are any with enough belief, scientific curiosity, and courage to follow, these will furnish a plain trail. I will now proceed straightforwardly with my narrative. For 6 months, I had been on the D'Entrecasteaux Islands gathering data for the concluding chapters of my book upon Flora of the Volcanic Islands of the South Pacific. The day before, I had reached Port Moresby and had seen my specimens safely stored on board the Southern Queen. As I sat on the upper deck that morning, I thought with homesick mind of the long leagues between me and Melbourne, and the longer ones between Melbourne and New York. It was one of Papua's yellow mornings, when she shows herself in her most somber, most baleful mood. The sky was a smouldering ochre. Over the island brooded a spirit sullen, implacable, and alien, filled with the threat of latent, malefic forces waiting to be unleashed. It seemed an emanation from the untamed, sinister heart of Papua herself, sinister even when she smiles. And now and then, on the wind, came a breath from unexplored jungles filled with unfamiliar odors, mysterious and menacing. It is on such mornings that Papua speaks to you of her immemorial ancientness and of her power. I am not unduly imaginative, but it is a mood that makes me shrink. I mention it because it bears directly upon Dr. Throckmorton's fate, nor is the mood Papua's alone. I have felt it in New Guinea, in Australia, in the Solomons, and in the Carolines. But it is in Papua that it seems most articulate. It is as though she said, "I am the Ancient of Days. I have seen the earth in the throes of its shaping. I am the primeval. I have seen races born and die, and lo, in my breast are secrets that would blast you by the telling, you pale babes of a puling age. You and I ought not be in the same world, yet I am and I shall be. Never will you fathom me, and you I hate, though I tolerate, but how long?" And then I seem to see a giant paw that reaches from Papua toward the outer world, stretching and sheathing monstrous claws. All feel this mood of hers. Her own people have it woven in them, part of their web and woof, flashing into light unexpectedly, like a soul from another universe, masking itself as swiftly. I fought against Papua as every white man must on one of her yellow mornings. And as I fought, I saw a tall figure come striding down the pier. Behind him came a kappa boy swinging a new valise. There was something familiar about the tall man. As he reached the gangplank, he looked up straight into my eyes, stared at me for a moment, and waved his hand. It was Dr. Throckmorton. Coincident with my recognition of him, there came a shock of surprise that was definitely unpleasant. It was Throckmorton, but there was something disturbingly different about him and the man I had known so well and had bidden farewell less than a year before. He was then, as you know, just turned 40, lithe, erect, muscular, the face of a student and of a seeker. His controlling expression was one of enthusiasm, of intellectual keenness, of, what shall I say, expectant search. His ever eagerly questioning brain had stamped itself upon his face. I sought in my mind for an explanation of that which I had felt on the flash of his greeting. Hurrying down to the lower deck, I found him with the purser. As I spoke, he turned and held out to me an eager hand, and then I saw what the change was that had come over him. He knew, of course, by my face, the uncontrollable shock that my closer look had given me. His eyes filled, and he turned briskly to the purser, then hurried off to his stateroom, leaving me standing, half-dazed. At the stair, he half-turned. "Oh, Goodwin," he said, "I'd like to see you later. Just now, there's something I must write before we start." He went up swiftly. "He looks rather queer, eh?" said the purser. "Know him well, sir. Seems to have given you quite a start, sir." I made some reply and went slowly to my chair. I tried to analyze what it was that had disturbed me so. What profound change in Throckmorton that had so shaken me. Now it came to me. It was as though the man had suffered some terrific soul-searing shock of rapture and horror combined, some soul cataclysm that in its climax had remolded his face deep from within, setting on it the seal of wedded joy and fear. As though indeed ecstasy supernal and terror infernal had once come to him hand in hand, taken possession of him, looked out of his eyes, and departing, left behind upon him ineradicably their shadow. Alternately, I looked out over the port and paced about the deck, striving to read the riddle, to banish it from my mind. And all the time still over Papua brooded its baleful spirit of ancient evil, unfathomable, not to be understood. Nor had it lifted when the Southern Queen lifted anchor and steamed out into the Gulf. I watched with relief the shores sink down behind us, welcomed the touch of the free sea wind. We seemed to be drawing away from something malefic, something that lurked within the island spell I have described, and the thought crept into my mind, whispered rather, from Throckmorton's face. I had hoped, and within the hope was an inexplicable shrinking, an unexpressed dread that I would meet Throckmorton at lunch. He did not come down, and I was sensible of a distinct relief within my disappointment. All that afternoon I lounged about uneasily, but still he kept to his cabin. Nor did he appear at dinner. Dusk and night fell swiftly. I was warm and went back to my deck chair. The Southern Queen was rolling to a disquieting swell, and I had the place to myself. Over the heavens was a canopy of cloud, glowing faintly and testifying to the moon riding behind it. There was much phosphorescence. Now and then, before the ship and at the sides, arose those strange little swirls of mist that steam up from the southern ocean like the breath of sea monsters, whirl for a moment and disappear. I lighted a cigarette and tried once more to banish Throckmorton's face from my mind. Suddenly, the deck door opened, and through it came Throckmorton himself. He paused uncertainly, looked up at the sky with a curiously eager, intent gaze, hesitated, then closed the door behind him. "Throckmorton," I called, "come sit with me. It's Goodwin." Immediately he made his way to me, sitting beside me with a gasp of relief that I noted curiously. His hand touched mine and gripped it with tenseness that hurt. His hand was ice-like. I puffed up my cigarette and by its glow scanned him closely. He was watching a large swirl of the mist that was passing before the ship. The phosphorescence beneath it illumined it with a fitful opalescence. I saw fear in his eyes. The swirl passed. He sighed. His grip relaxed, and he sank back. "Throckmorton," I said, wasting no time in preliminaries. "What's wrong? Can I help you?" He was silent. "Is your wife all right? And what are you doing here when I heard you had gone to the Carolines for a year?" I went on. I felt his body grow tense again. He did not speak for a moment, and then, "I'm going to Melbourne, Goodwin," he said. "I need a few things. Need them urgently. And more men. White men." His voice was low, preoccupied. It was as though the brain that dictated the words did so perfunctorily, half impatiently. Aloof, watching, strained to catch the first hint of approach of something dreaded. "You are making progress, then?" I asked. It was a banal question, put forth in a blind effort to claim his attention. "Progress?" he repeated. "Progress?" He stopped abruptly, rose from his chair, gazed intently toward the north. I followed his gaze. Far, far away, the moon had broken through the clouds. Almost on the horizon, you could see the faint luminescence of it upon the quiet sea. The distant patch of light quivered and shook. The clouds thickened again, and it was gone. The ship raced southward swiftly. Throckmorton dropped into his chair. He lighted a cigarette with a hand that trembled. The flash of the match fell on his face, and I noted with a queer thrill of apprehension that its unfamiliar expression had deepened, become curiously intensified as though a faint acid had passed over it, etching its lines faintly deeper. "It's the full moon tonight, isn't it?" he asked, palpably with studied inconsequence. "The first night of full moon," I answered. He was silent again. I sat silent too, waiting for him to make up his mind to speak. He turned to me as though he had made a sudden resolution. "Goodwin," he said, "I do need help. If ever man needed it, I do. Goodwin, can you imagine yourself in another world, alien, unfamiliar, a world of terror whose unknown joy is its greatest terror of all? You all alone there, a stranger, as such a man would need help. So I need—" He paused abruptly and arose to his feet stiffly. The cigarette dropped from his fingers. I saw that the moon had again broken through the clouds, and this time much nearer. Not a mile away was the patch of light that it threw upon the waves. Back of it, to the rim of the sea, was a lane of moonlight. It was a gleaming, gigantic serpent racing over the rim of the world, straight and surely toward the ship. Throckmorton gazed at it as though turned to stone. He stiffened to it as a pointer does to a hidden covey. To me, from him, pulsed a thrill of terror, but terror tinged with an unfamiliar, an infernal joy. It came to me and passed away, leaving me trembling with its shock of bitter sweet. He bent forward, all his soul in his eyes. The moon path swept closer, closer still. It was now less than half a mile away. From it, the ship fled. Almost it came to me as though pursued. Down upon it, swift and straight, a radiant torrent cleaving the waves raced the moon stream, and then— "Good God!" breathed Throckmorton, and if ever the words were a prayer and an invocation, they were. And then, for the first time, I saw it. The moon path, as I have said, stretched to the horizon and was bordered by darkness. It was as though the clouds above had been parted to form a lane, drawn aside like curtains, or as the waters of the Red Sea were held back to let the hosts of Israel through. On each side of the stream was the black shadow cast by the folds of the high canopies, and straight as a road between the opaque walls gleamed, shimmered, and danced the shining, racing rapids of moonlight. Far, it seemed immeasurably far, along this stream of silver fire, I sensed, rather than saw, something coming. It drew into sight as a deeper glow within the light. On and on it sped toward us, an opalescent mistiness that swept on with the suggestion of some winged creature in darting flight. Dimly, there crept into my mind memory of the Diak legend of the winged messenger of Buddha, the Akla bird, whose feathers are woven of the moon rays, whose heart is a living opal, whose wings in flight echo the crystal-clear music of the white stars, but whose beak is of frozen flame and shreds the souls of the unbelievers. Still it sped on, and now there came to me sweet, insistent tinklings, like a pizzicati on violins of glass, crystalline, as purest, clearest glass transformed to sound. And again the myth of the Akla bird came to me. But now it was close to the end of the white path, close up to the barrier of darkness, still between the ship and the sparkling head of the moon stream. And now it beat up against that barrier as a bird against the bars of its cage. And I knew that this was no mist born of sea and air. It whirled with shimmering plumes, with swirls of lacy light, with spirals of living vapor. It held within it odd, unfamiliar gleams, as of shifting mother of pearl. Coruscations and glittering atoms drifted through it as though it drew them from the rays that bathed it. Nearer and nearer it came, borne on the sparkling waves, and less grew the protecting wall of shadow between it and us. The crystalline sounds were louder, rhythmic as music from another planet. Now I saw that within the mistiness was a core, a nucleus of intenser light, veined, opaline, effulgent, intensely alive, and above it Tangled in the plumes and spirals that throbbed and whirled were 7 glowing lights. Through all the incessant but strangely ordered movement of the thing, these lights held firm and steady. They were 7, like 7 little moons. One was of a pearly pink, one of delicate nacreous blue, one of lambent saffron, one of the emerald you see in the shallow waters of tropic isles, a deathly white, a ghostly amethyst, and one of the silver that is seen only when the flying fish leap beneath the moon. There they shone, these 7 little vari-colored orbs within the opaline mistiness of whatever it was that, poised and expectant, waited to be drawn to us on the light-filled waves. The tinkling music was louder still. It pierced the ears with a shower of tiny lances. It made the heart beat jubilantly and checked it dolorously. It closed your throat with a throb of rapture and gripped it tight like the hand of infinite sorrow. Came to me now a murmuring cry, stilling the crystal clear notes. It was articulate, but as though from something utterly foreign to this world. The ear took the cry and translated with conscious labor into the sounds of earth. And even as it compassed, the brain shrank from it irresistibly, and simultaneously, it seemed, reached toward it with irresistible eagerness. Avoloha! Avoloha! So the cry seemed to throb. The grip of Throckmorton's hand relaxed. He walked stiffly toward the front of the deck, straight toward the vision, now but a few yards away from the bow. I ran toward him and gripped him and fell back, for now his face had lost all human semblance. Utter agony and utter ecstasy, there they were side by side, not resisting each other, unholy, inhuman companions blending into a look that none of God's creatures should wear, and deep, deep as his soul. A devil and a god dwelling harmoniously side by side, so must Satan, newly fallen, still divine, seeing heaven and contemplating hell, have looked. And then, swiftly, the moon path faded. The clouds swept over the sky as though a hand had drawn them together. Up from the south came a roaring squall. As the moon vanished, what I had seen vanished with it, blotted out as an image on a magic lantern. The tinkling ceased abruptly, leaving a silence like that which follows an abrupt and stupendous thunderclap. There was nothing about us but silence and blackness. Through me there passed a great trembling, as one who had stood on the very verge of the gulf wherein the men of the Louisades say lurks the fisher of the souls of men, and has been plucked back by sheerest chance. Throckmorton passed an arm around me. "It is as I thought," he said. In his voice was a new note, of the calm certainty that has swept aside a waiting terror of the unknown. "Now I know. Come with me to my cabin, old friend. For now that you too have seen, I can tell you," he hesitated, "what it was you saw," he ended. As we passed through the door, we came face to face with the ship's first officer. Throckmorton turned quickly, but not soon enough for the mate not to see and stare with amazement. His eyes turned questioningly to me. With a strong effort of will, Throckmorton composed his face into at least a semblance of normality. "Are we going to have much of a storm?" he asked. "Yes," said the mate. Then the seaman, getting the better of his curiosity, added profanely, "We'll probably have it all the way to Melbourne." Throckmorton straightened, as though with a new thought. He gripped the officer's sleeve eagerly. "You mean at least cloudy weather for," he hesitated, "for the next 3 nights, say?" "And for 3 more," replied the mate. "Thank God!" cried Throckmorton, and I think I never heard such relief and hope as was in his voice. The sailor stood amazed. "Thank God?" he repeated. "Thank What do you mean? But Throckmorton was moving onward to his cabin. I started to follow. The first officer stopped me. "Your friend," he said. "Is he ill?" "The sea," I answered hurriedly. "He's not used to it. I am going to look after him." I saw doubt and disbelief in the seaman's eyes, but I hurried on. For I knew now that Throckmorton was ill indeed, but that it was a sickness neither the ship's doctor nor any other could heal. Throckmorton was sitting on the side of his berth as I entered. He had taken off his coat. He was leaning over, face in hands. "Lock the door," he said quietly, not raising his head. "Close the portholes and draw the curtains, and have you an electric flash in your pocket? A good strong one?" He glanced at the small pocket flash I handed him and clicked it on. "Not big enough, I'm afraid," he said. "And after all," he hesitated, "it's only a theory." "What's only a theory?" I asked in astonishment. "Thinking of it as a weapon against what you saw," he said with a wry smile. "Throckmorton," I cried, "what was it? Did I really see that thing there in the moon path? Did I really hear—" "This, for instance," he interrupted. Softly he whispered, "Av-o-lo-ha." With the murmur, I seemed to hear again the crystalline, unearthly music, an echo of it, faint, sinister, mocking, jubilant. "Throckmorton," I said, "what was it? What are you flying from, man? Where is your wife and Stanton?" "Dead," he said monotonously. "Dead. All dead." Then, as I recoiled in horror, "All dead. Edith, Stanton, Thora, dead, or worse. And Edith in the moon pool with them, drawn by what you saw on the moon path, and that wants me, and that has put its brand upon me and pursues me." With a vicious movement, he ripped open his shirt. "Look at this," he said. I gazed. Around his chest, an inch above his heart, the skin was white as pearl. The whiteness was sharply defined against the healthy tint of the body. He turned, and I saw it ran around his back. It circled him. The band made a perfect cincture about 2 inches wide. "Burn it," he said, and offered me his cigarette. I drew back. He gestured peremptorily. I pressed the glowing end of the cigarette into the ribbon of white flesh. He did not flinch, nor was there odor of burning, nor, as I drew the little cylinder away, any mark upon the whiteness. "Feel it," he commanded again. I placed my fingers upon the band. It was cold, like frozen marble. He handed me a small penknife. "Cut," he ordered. This time, my scientific interest fully aroused, I did so without reluctance. The blade cut into flesh. I waited for the blood to come. None appeared. I drew out the knife and thrust it in again, fully 1/4 of an inch deep. I might have been cutting paper so far as any evidence followed that what I was piercing was human skin and muscle. Another thought came to me, and I drew back, revolted. "Throckmorton," I whispered. "Not leprosy." "Nothing so easy," he said. "Look again and find the places you cut." I looked, as he bade me, and in the white ring there was not a single mark. Where I had pressed the blade there was no trace. It was as though the skin had parted to make way for the blade and closed. Throckmorton arose and drew his shirt about him. "2 things you have seen," he said. "It and its mark. The seal it placed on me that gives it, I think, the power to follow me. Seeing, you must believe my story. Goodwin, I tell you again that my wife is dead, or worse, I do not know, the prey of what you saw. So too is Stanton, so Thora. How?" He stopped for a moment, then continued, "And I am going to Melbourne for the things to empty its den and its shrine, for dynamite to destroy it and its lair, if anything made on earth will destroy it, and for white men with courage to use them. Perhaps after you have heard, you will be one of these men." He looked at me a bit wistfully. "And now, do not interrupt me, I beg of you, till I am through, for," he smiled wanly, "the mate may be wrong, and if he is," he arose and paced twice about the room, "if he is, I may not have time to tell you." "Throckmorton," I answered, "I have no closed mind. Tell me, and if I can, I will help." He took my hand and pressed it. "Goodwin," he began, "if I have seemed to take the death of my wife lightly, or rather," his face contorted, "or rather, if I have seemed to pass it by as something not of first importance to me, believe me, it is not so. If the rope is long enough, if what the mate says is so, if there is cloudy weather until the moon begins to wane, I can conquer. That I know. But if it does not, if the dweller in the moon pool gets me, then must you or someone avenge my wife and me and Stanton. Yet I cannot believe that God would let a thing like that conquer. But why did he then let it take my Edith? And why does he allow it to exist? Are there things stronger than God, do you think, Goodwin?" He turned to me feverishly. I hesitated. "I do not know just how you define God," I said. "If you mean the will to know, working through science..." He waved me aside impatiently. "Science," he said. "What is our science against that? Or against the science of whatever cursed vanished race that made it, or made the way for it to enter this world of ours?" With an effort, he regained control of himself. "Goodwin," he said, "do you know at all of the ruins on the Carolines? The Cyclopean, megalithic cities and harbors of Ponape and Lele, of Kusei, of Rook and Hogalu, and a score of other islets there? Particularly, do you know of the Nan Matal and Metalanim?" "Of the Metalanim, I have heard and seen photographs," I said. "They call it, don't they, the Lost Venice of the Pacific?" "Look at this map," said Throckmorton. He handed me the map. "That," he went on, "is Christian's map of Metalanim Harbor and the Nan Matal. Do you see the rectangles marked Nan Tanakh?" "Yes," I said. "There," he said. "Under those walls is the moon pool and the 7 gleaming lights that raise the dweller in the pool and the altar and shrine of the dweller. And there, in the moon pool with it, lie Edith and Stanton and Thora." "The dweller in the moon pool?" I repeated, half incredulously. "The thing you saw," said Throckmorton solemnly. A solid sheet of rain swept the ports, and the Southern Queen began to roll on the rising swells. Throckmorton drew another deep breath of relief, and drawing aside a curtain, peered out into the night. Its blackness seemed to reassure him. At any rate, when he sat again, he was calm. "There are no more wonderful ruins in the world than those of the island Venice of Metalanim on the east shore of Ponape," he said almost casually. "They take in some 50 islets and cover with their intersecting canals and lagoons about 12 square miles. Who built them? None knows. When were they built? Ages before the memory of present man, that is sure. 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 years ago, the last more likely. All these islets, Goodwin, are squared, and their shores are frowning sea walls of gigantic basalt blocks hewn and put in place by the hands of ancient man. Each inner waterfront is faced with a terrace of those basalt blocks which stand out 6 feet above the shallow canals that meander between them. On the islets behind these walls are cyclopean and time-shattered fortresses, palaces, terraces, pyramids, immense courtyards strewn with ruins, and all so old that they seem to wither the eyes of those who look on them. There has been a great subsidence. You can stand out of Metalanim harbor for 3 miles, and look down upon the tops of similar monolithic structures and walls 20 feet below you in the water. And all about, strung on their canals, are the bulwarked islets with their enigmatic giant walls peering through the dense growths of mangroves, dead, deserted for incalculable ages, shunned by those who live near. You, as a botanist, are familiar with the evidence that a vast shadowy continent existed in the Pacific, a continent that was not rent asunder by volcanic forces, as was that legendary one of Atlantis in the Eastern Ocean. My work in Java, in Papua, and in the Ladrones had set my mind upon this Pacific lost land. Just as the Azores are believed to be the last high peaks of Atlantis, so evidence came to me steadily that Ponape and Lele and their basalt bulwarked islets were the last points of the slowly sunken western land clinging still to the sunlight, and had been the last refuge and sacred places of the rulers of that race which had lost their immemorial home under the rising waters of the Pacific. I believed that under these ruins I might find the evidence of what I sought. Time and again I had encountered legends of subterranean networks beneath the Nan Matal, of passages running back into the main island itself, basalt corridors that followed the lines of the shallow canals and ran under them to islet after islet, linking them in mysterious chains. My wife and I had talked before we were married of making this our great work. After the honeymoon, we prepared for the expedition. It was to be my monument. Stanton was as enthusiastic as ourselves. We sailed, as you know, last May in fulfillment of our dreams. At Ponape, we selected, not without difficulty, workmen to help us, diggers. I had to make extraordinary inducements before I could get together my force. Their beliefs are gloomy, these Ponapeans. They people their swamps, their forests, their mountains and shores with malignant spirits, Ani they call them. And they are afraid, bitterly afraid of the Isles of Ruins and what they think the ruins hide. I do not wonder, now, for their fear has come down to them through the ages, from the people before their fathers, as they call them, who, they say, made these mighty spirits their slaves and messengers. When they were told where they were to go and how long we expected to stay, they murmured. Those who, at last, were tempted made what I thought then merely a superstitious proviso that they were to be allowed to go away on the 3 nights of the full moon. If only I had heeded them and gone too. He stopped, and again over his face the lines etched deep. We passed, he went on, into Metalanim harbour. Off to our left, a mile away, arose a massive quadrangle. Its walls were all of 40 feet high and hundreds of feet on each side. As we passed it, our natives grew very silent, watched it furtively, fearfully. I knew it for the ruins that are called Nan Tanakh, the place of frowning walls. And at the silence of my men, I recalled what Christian had written of this place, of how he had come upon its ancient platforms and tetragonal enclosures of stonework, its wonder of tortuous alleyways and labyrinth of shallow canals, grim masses of stonework peering out from behind verdant screens, cyclopean barricades. And now, when we had turned into its ghostly shadows, straightway the merriment of our guides was hushed and conversation died down to whispers. For we were close to Nan Tanakh, the place of lofty walls, the most remarkable of all the Metalanim ruins. He arose and stood over me. Nan Tanakh, Goodwin, he said solemnly. A place where merriment is hushed indeed and words are stifled. Nan Tanakh, where the moon pool lies hidden behind the moon rock, but sends its diabolic soul out, even through the prisoning stone. He raised clenched hands. Oh, heaven! he breathed. "Grant me that I may blast it from earth." He was silent for a little time. "Of course, I wanted to pitch our camp there," he began again quietly, "but I soon gave up that idea. The natives were panic-stricken, threatened to turn back. No, they said, too great Ani there. We go to any other place, but not there. Although even then, I felt that the secret of the place was in Nantanach. I found it necessary to give in. The laborers were essential to the success of the expedition, and I told myself that after a little time had passed, and I had persuaded them that there was nothing anywhere that could molest them, we would move our tents to it. We finally picked for our base the islet called Ushan Tau. You see it here." He pointed to the map. "It was close to the Isle of Desire, but far enough away from it to satisfy our men. There was an excellent camping place there, and a spring of fresh water. It offered, besides, an excellent field for preliminary work before attacking the larger ruins. We pitched our tents, and in a couple of days the work was in full swing." "I do not intend to tell you now," Throckmorton continued, "the results of the next 2 weeks, Goodwin, nor of what we found. Later, if I am allowed, I will lay all that before you. It is sufficient to say that at the end of those 2 weeks, I had found confirmation of many of my theories, and we were well underway to solve a mystery of humanity's youth, so we thought. But enough. I must hurry on to the first stirrings of the inexplicable thing that was in store for us. The place, for all its decay and desolation, had not infected us with any touch of morbidity. That is not Edith, Stanton, or myself. My wife was happy. Never had she been happier. Stanton and she, while engrossed in the work as much as I, were of the same age, and they frankly enjoyed the companionship that only youth can give youth. I was glad, never jealous. But Thora was very unhappy. She was a Swede, as you know, and in her blood ran the beliefs and superstitions of the Northland, some of them so strangely akin to those of this far southern land, beliefs of spirits of mountain and forest and water, werewolves and beings malign. From the first, she showed a curious sensitivity to what, I suppose, may be called the influences of the place. She said it smelled of ghosts and warlocks. I laughed at her then, but now I believe that this sensitivity of what we call primitive people is perhaps only a clearer perception of the unknown which we, who deny the unknown, have lost. A prey to these fears, Thora always followed my wife about like a shadow, carried with her always a little sharp hand axe, and although we twitted her about the futility of chopping phantoms with such a weapon, she would not relinquish it. 2 weeks slipped by, and at their end, the spokesman for our natives came to us. The next night was the full of the moon, he said. He reminded me of my promise. They would go back to their village next morning. They would return after the 3rd night, as at that time the power of the Ani would begin to wane with the moon. They left us sundry charms for our protection and solemnly cautioned us to keep as far away as possible from Nantanach during their absence, although their leader politely informed us that no doubt we were stronger than the spirits. Half exasperated, half amused, I watched them go. No work could be done without them, of course, so we decided to spend the days of their absence junketing about the southern islets of the group. Under the moon, the ruins were inexpressibly weird and beautiful. We marked down several spots for subsequent exploration, and on the morning of the 3rd day set forth along the east face of the breakwater for our camp on Ushan Tau, planning to have everything in readiness for the return of our men the next day. We landed just before dusk, tired and ready for our cots. It was only a little after 10 o'clock when Edith awakened me. "Listen," she said. "Lean over with your ear close to the ground." I did so and seemed to hear far, far below, as though coming up from great distances, A faint chanting. It gathered strength, died down, ended. Began, gathered volume, faded away into silence. "It's the waves rolling on rocks somewhere," I said. "We're probably over some ledge of rock that carries the sound." "It's the first time I've heard it," replied my wife doubtfully. We listened again. Then through the dim rhythms, deep beneath us, another sound came. It drifted across the lagoon that lay between us and Nan Tanakh in little tinkling waves. It was music of a sort. I won't describe the strange effect it had upon me. You've felt it. "You mean on the deck?" I asked. Throckmorton nodded. "I went to the flap of the tent," he continued, "and peered out. As I did so, Stanton lifted his flap and walked out into the moonlight, looking over to the other islet and listening. I called to him. "That's the queerest sound," he said. He listened again. "Crystalline, like little notes of translucent glass, like the bells of crystal on the sistrums of Isis at Dendara Temple," he added, half dreamily. We gazed intently at the island. Suddenly, on the gigantic sea wall, moving slowly, rhythmically, we saw a little group of lights. Stanton laughed. "The beggars!" he exclaimed. "That's why they wanted to get away, is it? Don't you see, Dave? It's some sort of a festival, rites of some kind that they hold during the full moon. That's why they were so eager to have us keep away too." I felt a curious sense of relief, although I had not been sensible of any oppression. The explanation seemed good. It explained the tinkling music and also the chanting, worshippers no doubt in the ruins. Their voices carried along passages I now knew honeycombed the whole Nan Matal. "Let's slip over," suggested Stanton, but I would not. "They're a difficult lot as it is," I said. "If we break into one of their religious ceremonies, they'll probably never forgive us. Let's keep out of any family party where we haven't been invited." "That's so," agreed Stanton. The strange tinkling music, if music it can be called, rose and fell, now laden with sorrow, now filled with joy. "There's something very unsettling about it," said Edith at last, soberly. "I wonder what they make those sounds with. They frighten me half to death, and at the same time, they make me feel as though some enormous rapture was just around the corner." I had noted this effect too, although I had said nothing of it. And at the same time, there came to me a clear perception that the chanting which had preceded it had seemed to come from a vast multitude, thousands more than the place we were contemplating could possibly have held. Of course, I thought, this might be due to some acoustic property of the basalt, an amplification of sound by some gigantic sounding board of rock. Still, "It's devilish uncanny," broke in Stanton, answering my thought. And as he spoke, the flap of Thora's tent was raised, and out into the moonlight strode the old Swede. She was the great Norse type, tall, deep-breasted, molded on the old Viking lines. Her 60 years had slipped from her. She looked like some ancient priestess of Odin. He hesitated. "She knew," he said slowly, "something more far-seeing than my science had given her sight. She warned me, fools and mad, that we are to pass such things by without heed." He brushed a hand over his eyes. "She stood there," he went on. Her eyes were wide, brilliant, staring. She thrust her head forward toward Nan Tanakh, regarding the moving lights. She listened. Suddenly, she raised her arms and made a curious gesture to the moon. It was an archaic movement. She seemed to drag it from remote antiquity, yet in it was a strange suggestion of power. Twice she repeated this gesture, and the tinkling died away. She turned to us. "Go," she said, and her voice seemed to come from far distances. "Go from here, and quickly. Go while you may. They have called." She pointed to the islet. They know you are here. They wait." Her eyes widened further. "It is there," she wailed. "It beckons thee, there." She fell at Edith's feet, and as she fell over the lagoon came again the tinklings, now with a quicker note of jubilance, almost of triumph. We ran to Thora, Stanton and I, and picked her up. Her head rolled and her face, eyes closed, turned as though drawn full into the moonlight. I felt in my heart a throb of unfamiliar fear, for her face had changed again. Stamped upon it was a look of mingled transport and horror, alien, terrifying, strangely revolting. It was, he thrust his face close to my eyes, what you see in mine. For a dozen heartbeats I stared at him, fascinated, then he sank back again into the half-shadow of the berth. "I managed to hide her face from Edith," he went on. "I thought she had suffered some sort of a nervous seizure. We carried her into her tent. Once within, the unholy mask dropped from her, and she was again only the kindly, rugged old woman. I watched her throughout the night. The sounds from Nantanaq continued until about an hour before moonset. In the morning, Thora awoke, none the worse, apparently. She had had bad dreams, she said. She could not remember what they were, except that they had warned her of danger. She was oddly sullen, and I noted that throughout the morning her gaze returned again, half fascinatedly, half wonderingly, to the neighboring isles. That afternoon, the natives returned. They were so exuberant in their apparent relief to find us well and intact that Stanton's suspicions of them were confirmed. He slyly told their leader that, from the noise they had made on Nantanaq the night before, they must have thoroughly enjoyed themselves. I think I never saw such stark terror as the Ponapean manifested at the remark. Stanton himself was so plainly startled that he tried to pass it over as a jest. He met poor success. The men seemed panic-stricken, and for a time I thought they were about to abandon us, but they did not. They pitched their camp at the western side of the island, out of sight of Nantanaq. I noticed that they built large fires, and whenever I awoke that night, I heard their voices in slow, minor chant, one of their song charms, I thought drowsily, against evil Annie. I heard nothing else. The place of frowning walls was wrapped in silence. No lights showed. The next morning the men were quiet, a little depressed, but as the hours wore on they regained their spirits, and soon life at the camp was going on just as it had before. You will understand, Goodwin, how the occurrences I have related would excite the scientific curiosity. We rejected immediately, of course, any explanation admitting the supernatural. Why not? Except the curiously disquieting effects of the tinkling music and Thora's behavior, there was nothing to warrant any such fantastic theories, even if our minds had been the kind to harbor them. We came to the conclusion that there must be a passageway between Ponape and Nantanaq, known to the natives and used by them during their rites. Ceremonies were probably held in great vaults or caverns beneath the ruins. We decided at last that on the next departure of our laborers we would set forth immediately to Nantanaq. We would investigate during the day, and at evening my wife and Thora would go back to camp, leaving Stanton and me to spend the night on the island, observing from some safe hiding place what might occur. The moon waned, appeared crescent in the west, waxed slowly toward the full. Before the men left us, they literally prayed us to accompany them. Their importunities only made us more eager to see what it was that, we were now convinced, they wanted to conceal from us. At least that was true of Stanton and myself. It was not true of Edith. She was thoughtful, abstracted, reluctant. Thora, on the other hand, showed an unusual restlessness, almost an eagerness to go. Goodwin, he paused. Goodwin, I know now that the poison was working in Thora, and that women have perceptions that we men lack. Forebodings, sensings. I wish to heaven I had known it then. Edith, he cried suddenly. Edith, come back to me, forgive me. I stretched the decanter out to him. He drank deeply. Soon he had regained control of himself. When the men were out of sight around the turn of the harbour, he went on, we took our boat and made straight for Nan Tanach. Soon its mighty seawall towered above us. We passed through the water gate with its gigantic hewn prisms of basalt and landed beside a half-submerged pier. In front of us stretched a series of giant steps leading into a vast court strewn with fragments of fallen pillars. In the center of the court, beyond the shattered pillars, rose another terrace of basalt blocks, concealing, I knew, still another enclosure. And now, Goodwin, for the better understanding of what follows and to guide you, should I not be able to accompany you when you go there, listen carefully to my description of this place. Nan Tanach is literally 3 rectangles. The first rectangle is the sea wall, built up of monoliths. Gigantic steps lead up from the landing of the sea gate through the entrance to the courtyard. This courtyard is surrounded by another inner basalt wall. Within the courtyard is the second enclosure. Its terrace, of the same basalt as the outer walls, is about 20 feet high. Entrance is gained to it by many breaches which time has made in its stonework. This is the inner court, the heart of Nan Tanach. There lies the great central vault with which is associated the one name of living being that has come to us out of the mists of the past. The natives say it was the treasure house of Chowtalur, a mighty king who reigned long before their fathers. As Chow is the ancient Ponapian word both for sun and king, the name means place of the Sun King. And opposite this place of the Sun King is the Moon Rock that hides the moon pool. It was Stanton who first found what I call the Moon Rock. We had been inspecting the inner courtyard. Edith and Thora were getting together our lunch. I forgot to say that we had previously gone all over the islet and had found not a trace of living thing. I came out of the vault of Chowtalur to find Stanton before a part of the terrace, studying it wonderingly. "What do you make of this?" he asked me as I came up. He pointed to the wall. I followed his finger and saw a slab of stone about 15 feet high and 10 wide. At first, all I noticed was the exquisite nicety with which its edges joined the blocks about it. Then I realized that its color was subtly different, tinged with gray and of a smooth, peculiar deadness. "Looks more like calcite than basalt," I said. I touched it and withdrew my hand quickly, for at the contact every nerve in my arm tingled as though a shock of frozen electricity had passed through it. It was not cold as we know cold that I felt. It was a chill force. The phrase I have used, frozen electricity, describes it better than anything else. Stanton looked at me oddly. "So you felt it too," he said. I was wondering whether I was developing hallucinations like Thora. Notice, by the way, that the blocks beside it are quite warm beneath the sun. I felt them and touched the greyish stone again. The same faint shock ran through my hand, a tingling chill that had in it a suggestion of substance, of force. We examined the slab more closely. Its edges were cut as though by an engraver of jewels. They fitted against the neighboring blocks in almost a hairline. Its base, we saw, was slightly curved and fitted as closely as top and sides upon the huge stones on which it rested. And then we noted that these stones had been hollowed to follow the line of the grey stone's foot. There was a semicircular depression running from one side of the slab to the other. It was as though the grey rock stood in the center of a shallow cup, revealing half, covering half. Something about this hollow attracted me. I reached down and felt it. Goodwin, although the balance of the stones that formed it, like all the stones of the courtyard, were rough and age-worn. This was as smooth, as even surfaced, as though it just left the hands of the polisher. "It's a door!" exclaimed Stanton. "It swings around in that little cup. That's what makes the hollow so smooth." "Maybe you're right," I replied, "but how the devil can we open it?" We went over the slab again, pressing upon its edges, thrusting against its sides. During one of those efforts I happened to look up and cried out. For a foot above, and even each side of the corner of the grey rock's lintel, I had seen a slight convexity, visible only from the angle at which my gaze struck it. These bosses on the basalt were circular, 18 inches in diameter, as we learned later, and at the center extended 2 inches only beyond the face of the terrace. Unless one looked directly up at them while leaning against the moon rock, for this slab, Goodwin, is the moon rock, they were invisible, and none would dare stand there. We carried with us a small scaling ladder, and up this I went. The bosses were apparently nothing more than chiseled curvatures in the stone. I laid my hand on the one I was examining and drew it back so sharply I almost threw myself from the ladder. In my palm, at the base of my thumb, I had felt the same shock that I had in touching the slab below. I put my hand back. The impression came from a spot not more than an inch wide. I went carefully over the entire convexity, and 6 times more the chill ran through my arm. There were, Goodwin, 7 circles an inch wide in the curved place, each of which communicated the precise sensation I have described. The convexity on the opposite side of the slab gave precisely the same results, but no amount of touching or of pressing these spots singly or in any combination gave the slightest promise of motion to the slab itself. "And yet, they're what open it," said Stanton positively. "Why do you say that?" I asked. "I don't know," he answered hesitatingly, "but something tells me so. Throck," he went on, half earnestly, half laughingly. "The purely scientific part of me is fighting the purely human part of me. The scientific part is urging me to find some way to get that slab either down or open. The human part is just as strongly urging me to do nothing of the sort and get away while I can." He laughed again, shamefacedly. "Which will it be?" he asked, and I thought that in his tone the human side of him was ascendant. "It will probably stay as it is, unless we blow it to bits," I said. "I thought of that," he answered, and "I wouldn't dare," he added soberly enough. And even as I had spoken, there came to me the same feeling that he had expressed. It was as though something passed out of the grey rock that struck my heart as a hand strikes an impious lip. We turned away uneasily and faced Thora coming through a breach in the terrace. "Miss Edith wants you quick," she began, and stopped. I saw her eyes go past me and widen. She was looking at the grey rock. Her body grew suddenly rigid. She took a few stiff steps forward and then ran straight to it. We saw her cast herself upon its breast, hands and face pressed against it, heard her scream as though her very soul was being drawn from her, and watched her fall at its foot. As we picked her up, I saw steal from her face the look I had observed when I first heard the crystal music of Nan Tanach, that unhuman mingling of opposites. We carried Thora back, down to where Edith was waiting. We told her what had happened and what we had found. She listened gravely, and as we finished, Thora sighed and opened her eyes. "I would like to see the stone," she said. "Charles, you stay here with Thora." We passed through the outer court silently and stood before the rock. She touched it, drew back her hand as I had, thrust it forward again resolutely, and held it there. She seemed to be listening. Then she turned to me. "David," said my wife, and the wistfulness in her voice hurt me. "David, would you be very, very disappointed if we went from here without trying to find out any more about it? Would you?" "Goodwin, I never wanted anything so much in my life as I wanted to learn what that rock concealed. You will understand the cumulative curiosity that all the happenings had caused, the certainty that before me was an entrance to a place that, while known to the natives, for I still clung to that theory, was utterly unknown to any man of my race, that within, ready for my finding, was the answer to the stupendous riddle of these islands and a lost chapter in the history of humanity. There before me, and was I asked to turn away, leaving it unread? Nevertheless, I tried to master my desire, and I answered, "Edith, not a bit if you want us to do it." She read my struggle in my eyes. She looked at me searchingly for a moment and then turned back toward the grey rock. I saw a shiver pass through her. I felt a tinge of remorse and pity. "Edith," I exclaimed, "we'll go." She looked at me hard. "Science is a jealous mistress," she quoted. "No, after all, it may be just fancy. At any rate, you can't run away." "No, but Dave, I'm going to stay too." "You are not," I exclaimed. "You're going back to the camp with Thora. Stanton and I will be all right." "I'm going to stay," she repeated. And there was no changing her decision. As we neared the others, she laid a hand on my arm. "Dave," she said, "if there should be something, well, inexplicable tonight, something that seems too dangerous, will you promise to go back to our own islet tomorrow, or, while we can, and wait until the natives return?" I promised eagerly, for the desire to stay and see what came with the night was like a fire within me. And would to heaven I had not waited another moment, Goodwin. Would to heaven I had gathered them all together then and sailed back on the instant through the mangroves to Ushen Tau. We found Thora on her feet again and singularly composed. She claimed to have no more recollection of what had happened after she had spoken to Stanton and to me in front of the grey rock than she had after the seizure on Ushen Tau. She grew sullen under our questioning, precisely as she had before. But to my astonishment, when she heard of our arrangements for the night, she betrayed a febrile excitement that had in it something of exultance. We had picked a place about 500 feet away from the steps leading into the outer court. We settled down just before dusk to wait for whatever might come. I was nearest the giant steps, next to me Edith, then Thora, and last Stanton. Each of us had with us automatic pistols, and all, except Thora, had rifles. Night fell. After a time, the eastern sky began to lighten, and we knew that the moon was rising, grew lighter still, and the orb peeped over the sea, swam suddenly into full sight. Edith gripped my hand, for, as though the full emergence into the heavens had been a signal, we heard begin beneath us the deep chanting. It came from illimitable depths. The moon poured her rays down upon us, and I saw Stanton start. On the instant, I caught the sound that had roused him. It came from the inner enclosure. It was like a long, soft sighing. It was not human, seemed in some way mechanical. I glanced at Edith and then at Thora. My wife was intently listening. Thora sat as she had since we had placed ourselves, elbows on knees, her hands covering her face. And then, suddenly, from the moonlight flooding us, there came to me a great drowsiness. Sleep seemed to drip from the rays and fall upon my eyes, closing them inexorably. I felt Edith's hand relax in mine, and under my own heavy lids saw her nodding. I saw Stanton's head fall upon his breast and his body sway drunkenly. I tried to rise, to fight against the profound desire for slumber that pressed in on me. And as I fought, I saw Thora raise her head as though listening, saw her rise and turn her face toward the gateway. For a moment she gazed, and my drugged eyes seemed to perceive within it a deeper, stronger radiance. Thora looked at us. There was infinite despair in her face, and expectancy. I tried again to rise, and a surge of sleep rushed over me. Dimly, as I sank within it, I heard a crystalline chiming, raised my lids once more with a supreme effort, saw Thora, bathed in light, standing at the top of the stairs, and then sleep took me for its very own, swept me into the very heart of oblivion. Dawn was breaking when I wakened. Recollection rushed back on me, and I thrust a panic-stricken hand out toward Edith, touched her, and felt my heart give a great leap of thankfulness. She stirred, sat up, rubbing dazed eyes. I glanced toward Stanton. He lay on his side, back toward us, head in arms. Edith looked at me laughingly. "Heavens, what sleep," she said. Memory came to her. Her face paled. "What happened?" she whispered. "What made us sleep like that?" She looked over to Stanton, sprang to her feet, ran to him, shook him. He turned over with a mighty yawn, and I saw relief lighten her face as it had lightened my heart. Stanton raised himself stiffly. He looked at us. "What's the matter?" he exclaimed. "You look as though you've seen ghosts." Edith caught my hands. "Where's Thora?" she cried. Before I could answer, she ran out into the open, calling, "Thora! Thora!" Stanton stared at me. "Taken," was all I could say. Together, we went to my wife, now standing beside the great stone steps, looking up fearfully at the gateway into the terraces. There, I told them what I had seen before sleep had drowned me. And together then we ran up the stairs, through the court, and up to the grey rock. The grey rock was closed as it had been the day before, nor was there trace of its having opened. No trace. Even as I thought this, Edith dropped to her knees before it and reached toward something lying at its foot. It was a little piece of grey silk. I knew it for part of the kerchief Thora wore about her hair. Edith took the fragment, hesitated. I saw then that it had been cut from the kerchief as though by a razor edge. I saw too that a few threads ran from it, down toward the base of the slab, ran to the base of the grey rock, and under it. The grey rock was a door, and it had opened, and Thora had passed through it. I think, Goodwin, that for the next few minutes we all were a little insane. We beat upon that diabolic entrance with our hands, with stones and clubs. At last reason came back to us. Stanton set forth for the camp to bring back blasting powder and tools. While he was gone, Edith and I searched the whole islet for any other clue. We found not a trace of Thora, nor any indication of any living being save ourselves. We went back to the gateway to find Stanton returned. Goodwin, during the next 2 hours, we tried every way in our power to force entrance through the slab. The rock within effective blasting radius of the cursed door resisted our drills. We tried explosions at the base of the slab with charges covered by rock. They made not the slightest impression on the surface beneath, expending their force, of course, upon the slighter resistance of their coverings. Afternoon found us hopeless, so far as breaking through the rock was concerned. Night was coming on, and before it came, we would have to decide our course of action. I wanted to go to Ponape for help, but Edith objected that this would take hours, and after we had reached there, it would be impossible to persuade our men to return with us that night, if at all. What then was left? Clearly, only one of two choices: to go back to our camp and wait for our men to return, and on their return try to persuade them to go with us to Nantanach. But this would mean the abandonment of Thora for at least 2 days. We could not do it. It would have been too cowardly. The other choice was to wait where we were for night to come, to wait for the rock to open as it had the night before, and to make a sortie through it for Thora before it could close again. With the sun had come confidence, at least a shattering of the mephitic mists of superstition with which the strangeness of the things that had befallen us had clouded for a time our minds. In that brilliant light, there seemed no place for phantoms. The evidence that the slab had opened was unmistakable, but might not Thora simply have found it open through some mechanism, still working after ages, and dependent for its action upon laws of physics unknown to us upon the full light of the moon? The assertion of the natives that the Ani had greatest power at this time might be a far-flung reflection of knowledge which had found ways to use forces contained in moonlight, as we have found ways to utilize the forces in the sun's rays. If so, Thora was probably behind the slab, sending out prayers to us for help. But how explain the sleep that had descended upon us? Might it not have been some emanation from plants or gaseous emanations from the island itself? Such things were far from uncommon, we agreed. In some way, the period of their greatest activity might coincide with the period of the moon, but if this were so, why had not Thora also slept? As dusk fell, we looked over our weapons. Edith was an excellent shot with both rifle and pistol. With the idea that the impulse towards sleep was the result either of emanations such as I have described or man-made, we constructed rough and ready but effective neutralizers, which we placed over our mouths and nostrils. We had decided that my wife was to remain in the hollow spot. Stanton would take up a station on the far side of the stairway, and I would place myself opposite him on the side near Edith. The place I picked out was less than 500 feet from her, and I could reassure myself now as to her safety, as I looked down upon the hollow wherein she crouched. As the phenomena had previously synchronized with the rising of the moon, we had no reason to think they would occur any earlier this night. A faint glow in the sky heralded the moon. I kissed Edith, and Stanton and I took our places. The moon dawn increased rapidly. The disk swam up, and in a moment it seemed was shining in full radiance upon ruins and sea. As it rose, there came, as on the night before, the curious little sighing sound from the inner terrace. I saw Stanton straighten up and stare intently through the gateway, rifle ready. Even at the distance he was from me, I discerned amazement in his eyes. The moonlight within the gateway thickened, grew stronger. I watched his amazement grow into sheer wonder. I arose. "Stanton, what do you see?" I called cautiously. He waved a silencing hand. I turned my head to look at Edith. A shock ran through me. She lay upon her side. Her face was turned full toward the moon. She was in deepest sleep. As I turned again to call to Stanton, my eyes swept the head of the steps and stopped, fascinated, for the moonlight had thickened more. It seemed to be curdled there, and through it ran little gleams and veins of shimmering white fire. A languor passed through me. It was not the ineffable drowsiness of the preceding night. It was a sapping of all will to move. I tore my eyes away and forced them upon Stanton. I tried to call out to him. I had not the will to make my lips move. I had struggled against this paralysis, and as I did so, I felt through me a sharp shock. It was like a blow, and with it came utter inability to make a single motion. Goodwin, I could not even move my eyes. I saw Stanton leap upon the steps and move toward the gateway. As he did so, the light in the courtyard grew dazzlingly brilliant. Through it rained tiny tinklings that set the heart to racing with pure joy and stilled it with terror. And now, for the first time, I heard that cry, Avoloha, Avoloha, the cry you heard on deck. It murmured with the strange effect of a sound only partly in our own space, as though it were part of a fuller phrase passing through from another dimension and losing much as it came, infinitely caressing, infinitely cruel. On Stanton's face, I saw come the look I dreaded, and yet knew would appear, that mingled expression of delight and fear. The two lay side by side as they had on Thora, but were intensified. He walked on up the stairs, disappeared beyond the range of my fixed gaze. Again I heard the murmur, Avoloha! There was triumph in it now, and triumph in the storm of tinklings that swept over it. For another heartbeat there was silence. Then a louder burst of sound, and ringing through it, Stanton's voice from the courtyard, a great cry, a scream, filled with ecstasy, insupportable and horror unimaginable. And again there was silence. I strove to burst the invisible bonds that held me. I could not. Even my eyelids were fixed. Within them, my eyes, dry and aching, burned. Then, Goodwin, I first saw the inexplicable. The crystalline music swelled. Where I sat, I could take in the gateway and its basalt portals, rough and broken, rising to the top of the wall 40 feet above, shattered, ruined portals, unclimbable. From this gateway, an intenser light began to flow. It grew, it gushed, and into it, into my sight, walked Stanton. Stanton! But Goodwin, what a vision! He ceased. I waited. Goodwin, Throckmorton said at last. I can describe him only as a thing of living light. He radiated light, was filled with light, overflowed with it. Around him was a shining cloud that whirled through and around him in radiant swirls, shimmering tentacles, luminescent, coruscating spirals. I saw his face. It shone with a rapture too great to be borne by living men, and was shadowed with insuperable misery. It was as though his face had been remolded by the hand of God and the hand of Satan, working together and in harmony. You have seen it on my face, but you have never seen it in the degree that Stanton bore it. The eyes were wide open and fixed, as though upon some inward vision of hell and heaven. He walked like the corpse of a man damned, who carried within him an angel of light. The music swelled again. I heard again the murmuring, Avoloha. Stanton turned, facing the ragged side of the portal, and then I saw that the light that filled and surrounded him had a nucleus, a core, something shiftingly human-shaped that dissolved and changed, gathered itself, whirled through and beyond him and back again. And as this shining nucleus passed through him, Stanton's whole body pulsed with light. As the luminescence moved, there moved with it, still and serene always, 7 tiny globes of light like 7 little moons. So much I saw, and then swiftly, Stanton seemed to be lifted, levitated, up the unscalable wall and to its top. The glow faded from the moonlight. The tinkling music grew fainter. I tried again to move. The spell still held me fast. The tears were running down now from my rigid lids and brought relief to my tortured eyes. I have said my gaze was fixed. It was. But from the side, peripherally, it took in a part of the far wall of the outer enclosure. Ages seemed to pass, and I saw a radiance stealing along it. Soon there came into sight the figure that was Stanton. Far away he was, on the gigantic wall. But still, I could see the shining spirals whirling jubilantly around and through him, felt rather than saw his tranced face beneath the 7 lights. A swirl of crystal notes, and he had passed. And all the time, as though from some opened well of light, the courtyard gleamed and sent out silver fires that dimmed the moon rays, yet seemed strangely to be a part of them. 10 times he passed before me so. The luminescence came with the music, swam for a while along the man-made cliff of basalt, and passed away. Between times eternities rolled, and still I crouched there, a helpless thing of stone with eyes that would not close. At last, the moon neared the horizon. There came a louder burst of sound, the second and last cry of Stanton, like an echo of the first. Again, the soft sigh from the inner terrace. Then, utter silence. The light faded, the moon was setting, and with a rush life and power to move returned to me. I made a leap for the steps, rushed up them, through the gateway and straight to the grey rock. It was closed, as I knew it would be. But did I dream it, or did I hear, echoing through it as though from vast distances, a triumphant shouting, "Av-Olo-Ha! Av-Olo-Ha!" I remembered Edith. I ran back to her. At my touch, she wakened, looked at me wonderingly, raised herself on a hand. "Dave?" she said. I slept, after all. She saw the despair on my face and leaped to her feet. "Dave," she cried, "what is it? Where's Charles?" I lighted a fire before I spoke, then I told her. And for the balance of that night, we sat before the flames, arms around each other, like 2 frightened children. Suddenly Throckmorton held his hands out to me appealingly. "Goodwin, old friend," he cried, "don't look at me as though I were mad. It's truth, absolute truth. Wait." I comforted him as well as I could. After a little time he took up his story. "Never," he said, "did man welcome the sun as we did that morning. As soon as it was light we went back to the courtyard. The basalt walls whereon I had seen Stanton were black and silent. The terraces were as they had been. The grey slab was in its place. In the shallow hollow at its base was nothing. Nothing. Nothing was there anywhere on the islet of Stanton. Not a trace, not a sign on Nantanuk to show that he had ever lived. What were we to do? Precisely the same arguments that had kept us there the night before held good now, and doubly good. We could not abandon these 2, could not go as long as there was the faintest hope of finding them, and yet for love of each other, how could we remain? I loved my wife, Goodwin, how much I never knew until that day, and she loved me as deeply. "It takes only one each night," she said. "Beloved, let it take me." I wept, Goodwin. We both wept. "We will meet it together," she said. And it was thus, at last, that we arranged it. "That took great courage indeed, Throckmorton," I interrupted. He looked at me eagerly. "You do believe, then?" he exclaimed. "I believe," I said. He pressed my hand with a grip that nearly crushed it. "Now," he told me, "I do not fear. If I fail, you will prepare and carry on the work." I promised, and, heaven forgive me, that was 3 years ago. "It did take courage," he went on, again quietly. "More than courage, for we knew it was renunciation. Each of us in our hearts felt that one of us would not be there to see the sun rise, and each of us prayed that the death, if death it was, would not come first to the other. We talked it all over carefully, bringing to bear all our power of analysis and habit of calm, scientific thought. We considered minutely the time element in the phenomena. Although the deep chanting began at the very moment of moonrise, fully 5 minutes had passed between its full lifting and the strange, sighing sound from the inner terrace. I went back in memory over the happenings of the night before. At least 15 minutes had intervened between the first heralding sigh and the intensification of the moonlight in the courtyard. And this glow grew for at least 10 minutes more before the first burst of the crystal notes. The sighing sound. Of what had it reminded me? Of course, of a door revolving and swishing softly along its base. "Edith," I cried, "I think I have it. The grey rock opens 5 minutes after upon the moonrise, but whoever or whatever it is that comes through it must wait until the moon has risen higher, or else it must come from a distance. The thing to do is not to wait for it, but to surprise it before it passes out the door. We will go into the inner court early. You will take your rifle and pistol and hide yourself where you can command the opening. If the slab does open, the instant it moves, I will enter. It's our best chance, Edith. I think it's our only one." My wife demurred strongly. She wanted to go with me, but I convinced her that it was better for her to stand guard without, prepared to help me if I were forced from what lay behind the rock again into the open. The day passed too swiftly. In the face of what we feared, our love seemed stronger than ever. Was it the flare of the spark before extinguishment? I wondered. We prepared and ate a good dinner. We tried to keep our minds from anything but scientific aspect of the phenomena. We agreed that whatever it was, its cause must be human, and that we must keep that fact in mind every second. But what kind of men could create such prodigies? We thrilled at the thought of finding perhaps the remnants of a vanished race, living perhaps in cities over whose rocky skies the Pacific rolled, exercising there the lost wisdom of the half-gods of Earth's youth. At the half hour before moonrise, we too went into the inner courtyard. I took my place at the side of the grey rock. Edith crouched behind a broken pillar 20 feet away, slipped her rifle barrel over it so that it would cover the opening. The minutes crept by. The courtyard was very quiet. The darkness lessened, and through the breaches of the terrace, I watched the far sky softly lighten. With the first pale flush, the stillness became intensified. It deepened, became unbearably expectant. The moon rose, showed the quarter, the half, then swam up into full sight like a great bubble. Its rays fell upon the wall before me, and suddenly upon the convexities I have described, 7 little circles of light sprang out. They gleamed, glimmered, grew brighter, shone. The gigantic slab before me turned as though on a pivot, sighing softly as it moved. For a moment, I gasped in amazement. It was like a conjurer's trick, and the moving slab, I noticed, was also glowing, becoming opalescent like the little shining circles above. Only for a second I gazed, and then, with a word to Edith, flung myself through the opening which the slab had uncovered. Before me was a platform, and from the platform steps led downward into a smooth corridor. This passage was not dark. It glowed with the same faint silverly radiance as the door. Down it I raced. As I ran, plainer than ever before, I heard the chanting. The passage turned abruptly, passed parallel to the walls of the outer courtyard, and then once more led abruptly downward. Still, I ran, and as I ran, I looked at the watch on my wrist. Less than 3 minutes had elapsed. The passage ended. Before me was a high vaulted arch. For a moment, I paused. It seemed to open into space, a space filled with lambent, coruscating, many-colored mist, whose brightness grew even as I watched. I passed through the arch and stopped in sheer awe. In front of me was a pool. It was circular, perhaps 20 feet wide. Around it ran a low, softly curved lip of glimmering silvery stone. Its water was palest blue. The pool with its silvery rim was like a great blue eye staring upward. Upon it streamed 7 shafts of radiance. They poured down upon the blue eye like cylindrical torrents. They were like shining pillars of light rising from a sapphire floor. One was the tender pink of the pearl, one of the aurora's green, a third a deathly white, the fourth the blue in mother of pearl, a shimmering column of pale amber, a beam of amethyst, a shaft of molten silver. Such are the colors of the 7 lights that stream upon the moon pool. I drew closer, awe-stricken. The shafts did not illumine the depths. They played upon the surface and seemed there to diffuse, to melt into it. The pool drank them. Through the water, tiny gleams of phosphorescence began to dart, sparkles and coruscations of pale incandescence, and far, far below I sensed a movement, a shifting glow, as of something slowly rising. I looked upward, following the radiant pillars to their source. Far above were 7 shining globes, and it was from these that the rays poured. Even as I watched, their brightness grew. They were like 7 moons set high in some caverned heaven. Slowly their splendor increased, and with it the splendor of the 7 beams streaming from them. It came to me that they were crystals of some unknown kind, set in the roof of the moon pool's vault, and that their light was drawn from the moon, shining high above them. They were wonderful, those lights. And what must have been the knowledge of those who set them there? Brighter and brighter they grew as the moon climbed higher, sending its full radiance down through them. I tore my gaze away and stared at the pool. It had grown milky, opalescent. The rays gushing into it seemed to be filling it. It was alive with sparkling scintillations, glimmerings, and the luminescence I had seen rising from its depths was larger, nearer. A swirl of mist floated up from its surface. It drifted within the embrace of the rosy beam and hung there for a moment. The beam seemed to embrace it, sending through it little shining corpuscles, tiny rosy spiralings. The mist absorbed the rays, was strengthened by it, gained substance. Another swirl sprang into the amber shaft, clung and fed there, moved swiftly toward the first and mingled with it. And now other swirls arose here and there, too fast to be counted, hung poised in the embrace of the light streams, flashed and pulsed into each other. Thicker and thicker still they arose, until the surface of the pool was a pulsating pillar of opalescent mist, steadily growing stronger, drawing within it life from the 7 beams falling upon it, drawing to it from below the darting red atoms of the pool. Into its center was passing the luminescence I had sensed rising from the far depths, and the center glowed, throbbed, began to send out questing swirls and tendrils. There, forming before me, was that which had walked with Stanton, which had taken Thora, the thing I had come to find. With the shock of realization, my brain sprang into action. My hand fell to my pistol, and I fired shot after shot into its radiance. The place rang with the explosions, and there came to me a sense of unforgivable profanation. Devilish as I knew it to be, that chamber of the moon pool seemed also, in some way, holy, as though a god and a demon dwelt there, inextricably commingled. As I shot, the pillar wavered. The water grew more disturbed. The mist swayed and shook, gathered itself again. I slipped a second clip into the automatic, and another idea coming to me, took careful aim at one of the globes in the roof. From thence I knew came the force that shaped the dweller in the pool. From the pouring rays came its strength. If I could destroy them, I could check its forming. I fired again and again. If I hit the globes, I did no damage. The little motes in their beams danced with the motes in the mist, troubled. That was all. Up from the pool, like little bells, like bubbles of crystal notes, rose the tinklings. Their notes were higher, had lost their sweetness, were angry, as it were, with themselves. And then, out from the inexplicable, hovering over the pool, swept a shining swirl. It caught me above the heart, wrapped itself around me. I felt an icy coldness, and then there rushed over me a mingled ecstasy and horror. Every atom of me quivered with delight, and at the same time shrank with despair. There was nothing loathsome in it, but it was as though the icy soul of evil and the fiery soul of good had stepped together within me. The pistol dropped from my hand. So I stood, while the pool gleamed and sparkled. The streams of light grew more intense, and the mist glowed and strengthened. I saw that its shining core had shape, but a shape that my eyes and brain could not define. It was as though a being of another sphere should assume what it might of human semblance, but was not able to conceal that what human eyes saw was but a part of it. It was neither man nor woman. It was unearthly and androgynous. Even as I found its human semblance, it changed. And still the mingled rapture and terror held me. Only in a little corner of my brain dwelt something untouched, something that held itself apart and watched. Was it the soul? I have never believed, and yet, over the head of the misty body, there sprang suddenly out 7 little lights. Each was the color of the beam beneath which it rested. I knew now that the dweller was complete. And then, behind me, I heard a scream. It was Edith's voice. It came to me that she had heard the shots and followed me. I felt every faculty concentrate into a mighty effort. I wrenched myself free from the gripping tentacle, and it swept back. I turned to catch Edith, and as I did so, slipped, fell. As I dropped, I saw the radiant shape above the pool leap swiftly for me. There was the rush past me, and as the dweller paused, straight into it raced Edith, arms outstretched to shield me from it. He trembled. She threw herself squarely within its diabolic splendor, he whispered. She stopped and reeled as though she had encountered solidity, and as she faltered, it wrapped its shining self around her. The crystal tinklings burst forth jubilantly. The light filled her, ran through and around her as it had with Stanton, and I saw drop upon her face the look. From the pillar came the murmur, "Avoloha." The vault echoed it. "Edith!" I cried. "Edith!" I was in agony. She must have heard me, even through the thing. I saw her try to free herself. Her rush had taken her to the very verge of the moon pool. She tottered, and in an instant she fell, with the radiance still holding her, still swirling and winding around and through her, into the moon pool. She sank, Goodwin, and with her went the dweller. I dragged myself to the brink. Far down, I saw a shining, many-colored, nebulous cloud descending, caught a glimpse of Edith's face, disappearing. Her eyes stared up to me, filled with supernal ecstasy and horror, and vanished. I looked about me stupidly. The 7 globes still poured their radiance upon the pool. It was pale blue again. Its sparklings and coruscations were gone. From far below there came a muffled outburst of triumphant chanting. "Edith!" I cried again. "Edith, come back to me!" And then a darkness fell upon me. I remember running back through the shimmering corridors and out into the courtyard. Reason had left me. When it returned, I was far out at sea in our boat, wholly estranged from civilization. A day later, I was picked up by the schooner in which I came to Port Moresby. "I have formed a plan. You must hear it, Goodwin." He fell upon his berth. I bent over him. Exhaustion and the relief of telling his story had been too much for him. He slept like the dead. All that night, I watched over him. When dawn broke, I went to my room to get a little sleep myself, but my slumber was haunted. The next day, the storm was unabated. Throckmorton came to me at lunch. He looked better. His strange expression had waned. He had regained much of his old alertness. "Come to my cabin," he said. There, he stripped his shirt from him. "Something is happening," he said. "The mark is smaller." It was as he said. "I'm escaping," he whispered jubilantly. "Just let me get to Melbourne safely, and then we'll see who'll win. For Goodwin, I'm not at all sure that Edith is dead, as we know death, nor that the others are. There was something outside experience there, some great mystery." And all that day, he talked to me of his plans. "There's a natural explanation, of course," he said. "My theory is that the moon rock is of some composition sensitive to the action of moon rays, somewhat as the metal selenium is to sun rays. There is a powerful quality in moonlight, as both science and legends can attest. We know of its effect upon the mentality, the nervous system, even upon certain diseases. The moon slab is of some material that reacts to moonlight. The circles over the top are, without doubt, its operating agency. When the light strikes them, they release the mechanism that opens the slab, just as you can open doors with sunlight by an ingenious arrangement of selenium cells. Apparently, it takes the strength of the full moon to do this. We will first try a concentration of the rays of the nearly full moon upon these circles to see whether that will open the rock. If it does, we will be able to investigate the pool without interruption from what emanates. Look, here on the chart are their locations. I have made this in duplicate for you in the event of something happening to me." He worked upon the chart a little more. "Here," he said, "is where I believe the 7 great globes to be. They are probably hidden somewhere in the ruins of the islet called Tau, where they can catch the first moon rays. I have calculated that when I entered, I went so far this way. Here is the turn. So far this way, took this other turn, and ran down this long, curving corridor to the hall of the moon pool. That ought to make lights, at least approximately here," he pointed. "They are certainly cleverly concealed, but they must be open to the air to get the light. They should not be too hard to find. They must be found." He hesitated again. "I suppose it would be safer to destroy them, for it is clearly through them that the phenomenon of the pool is manifested, and yet to destroy so wonderful a thing. Perhaps the better way would be to have some men up by them, and if it were necessary, to protect those below, to destroy them on signal, or they might simply be covered. That would neutralize them. To destroy them?" He hesitated again. "No. The phenomenon is too important to be destroyed without fullest investigation." His face clouded again. "But it is not human. It can't be," he muttered. He turned to me and laughed. "The old conflict between science and too frail human credulity," he said, again. "We need 6 diving suits. The pool must be entered and searched to its depths. That will indeed take courage, yet in the time of the new moon it should be safe, or perhaps better after the dweller is destroyed or made safe." We went over plans, accepted them, rejected them, and still the storm raged, and all that day and all that night. I hurry to the end. That afternoon, there came a steady lightening of the clouds, which Throckmorton watched with deep uneasiness. Toward dusk they broke away suddenly, and soon the sky was clear. The stars came twinkling out. "It will be tonight," Throckmorton said to me. "Goodwin, friend, stand by me. Tonight it will come, and I must fight." I could say nothing. About an hour before moonrise we went to his cabin. We fastened the portholes tightly and turned on the lights. Throckmorton had some queer theory that the electric rays would be a bar to his pursuer. I don't know why. A little later he complained of increasing sleepiness. "But it's just weariness," he said. "Not at all like that other drowsiness. It's an hour till moonrise still." He yawned at last. "Wake me up a good 15 minutes before." He lay upon the berth. I sat thinking. I came to myself with a start. What time was it? I looked at my watch and jumped to the porthole. It was full moonlight. The orb had been up for fully half an hour. I strode over to Throckmorton and shook him by the shoulder. "Up, quick, man!" I cried. He rose sleepily. His shirt fell open at the neck, and I looked in amazement at the white band around his chest. Even under the electric light it shone softly, as though little flecks of light were in it. Throckmorton seemed only half awake. He looked down at his breast, saw the glowing cincture, and smiled. "Oh yes," he said drowsily. "It's coming. To take me back to Edith. Well, I'm glad." "Throckmorton," I cried, "wake up! Fight!" "Fight," he said. "No use. Keep the maps. Come after us." He went to the port and drowsily drew aside the curtain. The moon traced a broad path of light straight to the ship. Under its rays, the band around his chest gleamed brighter and brighter. Shot forth little rays, seemed to move. He peered out intently, and suddenly, before I could stop him, threw open the port. I saw a glimmering presence moving swiftly along the moon path toward us, skimming over the waters. And with it raced little crystal tinklings, and far off I heard a long-drawn, murmuring cry. On the instant, the lights went out in the cabin, evidently throughout the ship, for I heard shoutings above. I sprang back into a corner and crouched there. At the porthole was a radiance, swirls and spirals of living white cold fire. It poured into the cabin, and it was filled with dancing motes of light, and over the radiant core of it shone 7 little lights like tiny moons. It gathered Throckmorton to it. Light pulsed through and from him. I saw his skin turn to a translucent, shimmering whiteness like illumined porcelain. His face became unrecognizable, inhuman with the monstrous twin expressions. So he stood for a moment. The pillar of light seemed to hesitate, and the 7 lights to contemplate me. I shrank further down into the corner. I saw Throckmorton drawn to the port, the room filled with murmuring. I fainted. When I awakened, the lights were burning again, but of Throckmorton there was no trace. There are some things that we are bound to regret all our lives. I suppose I was unbalanced by what I had seen. I could not think clearly, but there came to me the sheer impossibility of telling the ship's officers what I had seen, what Throckmorton had told me. They would accuse me, I felt, of his murder. At neither appearance of the phenomenon had any save our 2 selves witnessed it. I was certain of this because they would surely have discussed it. Why none had seen it, I do not know. The next morning, when Throckmorton's absence was noted, I merely said that I had left him early in the evening. It occurred to no one to doubt me or to question me further. His strangeness had caused much comment. All had thought him half mad. And so it was officially reported that he had fallen or jumped from the ship during the failure of the lights, the cause of which was another mystery of that night. Afterward, the same inhibition held me back from making his and my story known to my fellow scientists. But this inhibition is suddenly dead, and I am not sure that its death is not a summons from Throckmorton. And now I am going to Nan Tanak to make amends for my cowardice by seeking out the Dweller. so sure am I that all I have written here is absolutely true. The end.
Thank you for listening to The Moon Pool by Abraham Merritt. We hope you enjoyed this journey into classic horror stories. If you'd like to explore more timeless stories, be sure to visit our channel, where you'll find a wide selection of audiobooks ranging from science fiction to adventure, non-fiction, documentary, and more. If you enjoyed this audiobook, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting us know which stories you'd like to hear next. Your engagement helps us continue to bring classic literature to life for listeners like you. Visit our channel page to discover more great audiobooks that may pique your interest. Thank you again for listening, and we look forward to having you with us on our next adventure.